My name is Junie Calloway, and I was 30 years old when the woman who cut my hair told me my grandmother had died. Not my mother, not my father, my hairdresser. 12 years before that, 2 weeks after my 18th birthday, my parents set my clothes in 3 grocery sacks on the front steps and changed the deadbolt, while I stood in the driveway with my car keys in my hand. And now here they were, front row at Grandma Opal's funeral, my mother's hand wrapped around mine like she'd held it every single day of those 12 years, whispering into my ear over the casket, "We ought to sit down about the estate, honey, as a family." They thought they were walking into money. What they walked into was the one room in Kentucky where a dead woman could still open her mouth and speak. And what the judge read out loud off the 4th page of that trust, the paragraph my grandmother wrote 16 months before any of it happened, nobody in my family saw coming, including me. Stay with me, because I promise you, by the end of this, you will understand exactly why a 78-year-old woman spent a decade quietly building a wall, and exactly who she built it against. I was elbow deep in a 4th grade recorder concert when it happened. I teach music at Ledbetter Elementary in Tanner County, Kentucky. 26 kids, 41 recorders, and a piano that's been out of tune since the first Bush administration. It was the 2nd Thursday in April, and I had my phone face down on the piano bench where it belongs. When the bell rang, there were 9 missed calls. Not from my parents. From Dinah, who has cut my hair since I was 19. She was crying so hard I had to ask her twice. Opal Calloway had passed in her sleep sometime before daylight, in her own bed, in her own house, on Weatherby Road, which was the only arrangement that woman would ever have agreed to. And then Dinah said the thing that put frost in my chest. "Junie, honey, your mama came in for a wash and said at 10 o'clock this morning. She told the whole shop. She said arrangements were already being made." 10 o'clock. It was 4:40 in the afternoon. My grandmother had been gone since before sunrise, and the 2 people who called themselves my family had let me hear it from a woman holding a pair of scissors. I drove the 11 miles out to Weatherby Road with both hands steady on the wheel, because you don't fall apart in front of children, and you don't fall apart on a county road. You do it later, on your own time, in your own kitchen. The gravel crunched the same way it always had. The forsythia by the mailbox was doing what forsythia does in April, which is show off. And in the front window, glowing soft and orange through the lace curtain, was the lamp, the red glass lamp, burning like nothing in this world had changed. Then I got up close to the door, and I saw the index card, taped at eye level in my mother's small, careful insurance adjuster handwriting. Contents inventoried and photographed, do not remove items. C and D Calloway. She had been dead less than 12 hours, and my mother had already walked through her house with a clipboard and priced it. I stood on that step a long, long time, and I thought about the last time I stood there at night with everything I owned at my feet. You need to understand what kind of house I grew up in. On top of my mother's refrigerator, where other mothers keep a cookie jar, my mother kept a green spiral notebook. On the cover, in permanent marker, she had written one word: accounts. She started it the fall I turned 15. Room and board, $175 a month. Itemized in her tidy blue hand, with a running balance carried down at the bottom of every page like a bank statement. Braces, $70 a month for 30 months. A winter coat from the outlet mall in Elizabethtown, $49.99, entered on the day she bought it. My mother, Charlotte Calloway, worked 22 years as a claims adjuster for a regional insurance outfit. Her entire profession was walking into somebody's worst day and assigning a number. She could look at a burned kitchen and tell you what it was worth to the dollar. She ran her house the same way. Every kindness was recorded somewhere. Every gift came with a reminder attached. 6 months later, at exactly the moment it would sting. "That coat wasn't cheap, Junie. You remember what we do for you." And my daddy, Dale Calloway, 31 years at the propane company, never once argued with the system. He sat at the end of that table behind his newspaper, like a man waiting out a thunderstorm he had no opinion about. And when I'd look at him, hoping, he'd give me this small, apologetic little shrug, like the notebook was weather, like it was gravity, like it wasn't his wife's handwriting. And then, 4 miles out of town, there was Grandma Opal's kitchen. Saturday mornings, biscuits out of a pan older than my father, coffee so weak you could read the newspaper straight through it. Seed catalogs stacked on the windowsill in January like other people stack Christmas cards. Opal ran a greenhouse and nursery on Route 9 for 38 years. Calloway's glass house. Geraniums in spring, mums in fall, poinsettias at Christmas, and a reputation from 3 counties over for never once in her whole life paying retail for anything. I asked her one time, I was maybe 11, what I owed her for gas money after she'd driven me all the way to Bowling Green for a band audition. She laughed so hard she had to put her hand on the counter. Eat your biscuit, she said. You don't owe me a thing, child. You never will. Same last name, 4 miles apart, 2 entirely different countries. I spent my whole childhood going back and forth across that border, wondering why love cost $175 a month in one kitchen and nothing at all in the other. I didn't have the word for it then. I just knew that in one house I was a daughter, and in the other house I was a balanced stew. And in the spring of 2011, the 2 countries went to war. In March of that year, Grandma Opal fell in the greenhouse and broke her hip. She was 64. She had the surgery in Bowling Green. She came home in 3 weeks, and she went after that walker like it had insulted her personally. I was 17. I drove her to physical therapy every single afternoon after school in her old Ford, and that is how I got a front row seat to what my parents did next. My mother showed up at that hospital with a folder. Not flowers. A folder. Inside it were brochures for a place out on the bypass called Cedar Ridge Assisted Living, and a 1-page valuation printout on the Weatherby Road property, and a second one on the greenhouse. Grandma Opal was still 4 days out of surgery, and my mother was already appraising the walls around her. She told the aunts she was getting out in front of it. She told the nurses she was the responsible one in this family. She used the word manage so many times that spring it started to sound like a threat. Opal said no, flat. She said it from a hospital bed with a catheter bag hanging off the side of it, and she said it clear. And that should have been the end of it. Except one night in May, I came down the hall for a glass of water and heard my parents at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a calculator between them. And my mother was saying words I had never heard in that house before. Petition, guardianship, incapacity, conservatorship of the person, and the estate. And my daddy said, whatever you think's best, Charlotte. I stood in the dark hallway of the Ledger house with my phone in my hand, and I looked those words up, and my stomach went straight through the floor. My mother wasn't planning to help her mother-in-law get better. She was planning to go to a courthouse and ask a judge to declare her incompetent, take her checkbook, take her greenhouse, and sell her out of her own bed. And 6 weeks later, she filed. Here's what my parents didn't count on. In Kentucky, when you petition to have a person declared disabled, the court does not simply take your word for it. The court sends somebody to look. Her name was Mrs. Renfro. She was a court-appointed evaluator with a state car and a clipboard, and she came out to Weatherby Road on a Tuesday in July while I was there after therapy. She watched my grandmother make coffee. She watched her write out a check for the water bill and record it in the register. She asked her the date, the year, and the name of the sitting president, and my grandmother answered all 3 and then volunteered, unprompted, the current wholesale price of a flat of impatiens, which she considered the only economic indicator that meant a thing. And then Mrs. Renfro asked to speak to me out on the back steps, alone. I was 17 years old, and I understood with complete and terrible clarity that both countries were listening. I told the truth. I told her my grandmother cooked her own meals and did her own books and ran a business with 11 seasonal employees. I told her I'd been driving her to therapy since March, and I showed Mrs. Renfro the little spiral notebook where I'd logged every single session in purple gel pen, 22 weeks of Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I told her my grandmother was the sharpest person I had ever met in my life, and that nobody in that house needed managing. Dr. Ansel Boyd, who'd been her physician for 18 years, wrote the court and said the same thing in language with more syllables. In September of 2011, the petition was denied. My grandmother kept her house, her business, her money, and her name. And my mother did not scream. That's the part people always get wrong about her. She came out of that courthouse with her chin level and her purse on her arm, and she drove me home in a silence you could have stood a fork up in, and at the red light by the dairy bar she said one quiet sentence without ever turning her head. "You'll find out what loyalty costs, Junie." I thought that was just something bitter people say. 5 weeks later, I found out it was an invoice. I turned 18 on the 9th of October. 2 weeks after that, I came home from my shift at the Blue Plate Cafe at 10:15 at night, and my key wouldn't turn. The porch light was off, but I could see the shapes on the steps. 3 grocery sacks folded shut at the top, and my duffel bag from band camp sitting on top of them like a bow. My mother opened the door about 4 inches. The chain stayed on. And she wasn't angry. That's what I need you to hear. She was calm. She was pleasant. She was using the exact voice I'd heard her use on the phone with policyholders whose claims she was denying. "You're 18 now," she said. "You made your choice in that courtroom, and I have honored it. Love is an account, Junie. Every account gets settled, and yours is overdrawn." Behind her, at the edge of the hallway light, I could see my father's shape. Not moving, not coming forward. And that shape told me everything I would ever need to know about my daddy. The door shut, the deadbolt turned over, and I stood on the concrete steps of the house I grew up in, doing arithmetic no 18-year-old should have to do. How much was in my checking account? Whose couch I could ask for? How many shifts until a deposit? Then I put the sacks in the trunk of a 1997 Corolla, and I drove 4 miles out Route 9, and I knocked on my grandmother's door at 11 o'clock at night. She opened it in her housecoat. She looked at me. She looked past me at the car, with the trunk open, and she did not ask one single question. She stepped back into her front room, and she reached over to the little table by the window, and she turned on that red glass lamp, warm and orange, right through the lace. "Love doesn't keep receipts, honey," she said. "It leaves a lamp on." And from that night forward, every evening for the rest of her life, that lamp came on in that window so that I would always know which house was mine. Remember that lamp. I need you to remember it because it comes back at the end of this in a way I still can't talk about without stopping. I want to tell you, the next 12 years were a montage. They weren't. They were just long. I stayed in my grandmother's back bedroom for 14 months, then a room over the laundromat on 3rd Street. I waited tables, I cleaned 2 churches on Saturdays, and I took out loans and put myself through Western Kentucky with a music education degree, which is not a fast degree, and it is not a cheap one. I'm proud of that, but I'm not going to pretend it was clean. Because there was a stretch, from the spring of 2013 to the fall of that year, when I lived in that Corolla. The room over the laundromat went when the laundromat sold. Grandma Opal would have taken me back in 1 second flat, and that is exactly why I didn't ask her. 20 years old and stupid with pride, I had decided that being taken in once was a mercy and being taken in twice was a habit. So I parked behind the Baptist church, and I showered in the field house at school, and I told everybody I had a place. And on the 11th of June, 2013, I walked into the Save, a lot on the bypass, and I put a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a 3-pack of white socks in my backpack, and I walked out the front door. The manager caught me in the parking lot. Misdemeanor theft under $500. I paid a fine of $183 over 4 months. I did 16 hours picking up trash on Highway 31, and I never told one living soul. Not my grandmother, not a friend, nobody. I came out of that with a rule carved into me somewhere permanent. Need nothing, owe nothing. If nobody's holding anything of yours, nobody can drop it. It felt like strength for 12 years. Hold on to that too, because a lawyer in a gray suit is going to say the word theft out loud in a courtroom in about 20 minutes, and it is going to be the worst moment of my adult life. The years stacked up the way years do. I got hired at Ledbetter in 2018. Music, kindergarten through 5th, plus the Christmas program, plus the spring program, plus the bus duty nobody else wanted. And Saturday mornings belonged to Weatherby Road, biscuits, weak coffee, and my grandmother reading the obituaries out loud like they were box scores. 12 good years. Then, in the summer of 2022, Opal started making appointments she wouldn't explain, driving herself into town to an attorney named Evelyn Rourke, coming home with her mouth pressed into a flat line like a woman licking an envelope shut. The diagnosis came in November of that year, pulmonary fibrosis. The lungs go stiff, and there is no bottom of the hill where it levels out. She took that news the way she took an expired coupon: brief irritation, immediate planning. She sold the glasshouse inventory, leased the building to a landscaping outfit out of Franklin, and made it clear she was dying at home or not at all. That last winter, that kitchen was never empty. Bernice Tuttle from the next farm over, who had lived beside my grandmother for 31 years. Loretta Sims, who owns the Blue Plate and brings pie with opinions attached to it. Half the gray-headed women in Tanner County came through that back door like it was a chapel with better snack. And twice more, Evelyn Rourke came out, and the two of them shut the door to the front room for an hour at a time. When I asked, my grandmother waved her hand. Paperwork, honey. Old women and paperwork. But one night in February, near the end, she was propped up on those pillows looking smaller than she had any right to look. And she caught my wrist with more grip than that woman had any business still having. When they come around smiling, she said, "You let Evelyn do the talking first. Promise me that." I said, "When who comes around smiling, Grandma?" And she just looked at me, steady, the exact same way she'd looked at that court evaluator 12 years before. Promise me. So I promised. 7 weeks later she was gone, and I was standing on her step reading an index card taped to her door. My parents ran that funeral like a campaign stop. My mother wore the correct navy blue and cried at the correct volume, dabbing underneath her eyes so as not to disturb anything. My daddy stood at the door of Corinth Baptist, shaking every hand in the county, accepting condolences for a woman he had helped try to have declared incompetent, and I watched good people who didn't know any better squeeze his shoulder and tell him she was in a better place. I sat 5 rows back with Bernice on one side and Loretta on the other. And at the end of the visitation, at the casket, my mother materialized beside me and slid her arm through mine like we did this every Sunday. Same perfume, 12 years, and the same perfume. "She looks peaceful," my mother said. And then, in the very same breath, with that casket 18 inches away, "We ought to sit down about the estate, honey, as a family. As a family." I hadn't been family since an October night in 2011. But my grandmother's money didn't know that yet, and as far as my mother was concerned, that was the only vote that counted. Across the aisle, my cousin Tessa gave me a little wave, and then looked down on her phone real fast. I clocked that. I taught that girl to parallel park in the church lot. I said nothing. I'd made a promise about exactly this moment, even though I didn't understand it yet. 2 days later, the letter came. Heavy cream envelope. Law Office of Evelyn Rourke, addressed to me, with copies noted to Dale and Charlotte Calloway. All interested parties invited to the reading of the estate plan of Opal Marie Calloway, Thursday morning, 10 o'clock. My phone rang inside the hour. My mother, warm as a biscuit. "We'll come get you, sweetheart. We ought to walk in together." I drove myself. Evelyn Rourke's office was above the old dry goods building on the square. Law books, a coffee maker older than me, and Evelyn herself, 68 years old, reading glasses on a chain, with the general climate of a woman who has never once in her life been successfully talked over. My parents arrived in their church clothes. My mother had brought a leather folio, and it sat on her knees the entire time. Prepared. Evelyn read without any theater at all. The estate of Opal Marie Calloway, held in the Opal Calloway Revocable Living Trust. The house in 11 acres on Weatherby Road, appraised at $310,000. The glasshouse property on Route 9, under commercial lease, $540,000. Investment accounts totaling $1,840,000, built out of 38 years of geraniums, index funds, and the deep, unshakable patience of a woman who considered paying full price a moral failing. Cash and personal property, $110,000. Right at $2,800,000. And every dollar of it, the house, the acreage, the glass house, the accounts, to her granddaughter Junie Calloway, sole beneficiary. To her son Dale and his wife Charlotte, $10,000 each, and I'm quoting, "with my thanks for what they taught me in 2011. The room went so quiet I could hear the coffee maker. I sat there with my ears ringing and I watched my mother, because 12 years of missing somebody teaches you to watch them. She didn't flinch. She smiled. She reached over and took my hand in both of hers, and she said, Warm as a heating pad. Oh, honey, what a responsibility for you. Of course we'll manage it for you. Like the money had been left to them, with an errand attached. I took my hand back gently and I said, no, thank you. And my mother kept right on smiling while she gathered her coat. That smile frightened me worse than the index card had, because that was the smile of a woman with a plan. The first move was not a lawyer. The first move was a pot roast. She called me that Sunday, and her voice was in a register I had never once heard aimed at me, soft, unhurried, almost shy. Come to supper, no business, no estate talk. I've missed you, Junie. I want to be honest with you about what happened in my chest when she said that, because I think some of you already know. I was 30 years old. I owned shoes older than my relationship with my parents. And some animal part of me, some 18-year-old still standing on a dark step doing arithmetic, sat straight up at the sound of my mother saying, I've missed you, the way a dog sits up at keys in the door. I knew what it was. Let me be clear that I knew. I had watched that woman appraise a house from a hospital visitor's chair. People always ask afterward, why would you even go? Here is the answer, and it's the truest thing in this whole story. You can know exactly what somebody is and still be starving for them. Understanding it doesn't kill the hunger, it just teaches you to eat around it. So I said yes. I ironed a blouse like it was armor, and I drove out to that brick ranch with the dark front window. And for 1 hour, I'll admit this to you and to nobody else, it was nice. The pot roast was the same. The stories were the same. My daddy laughed at my joke. And then the dessert plates came out, and my mother set a plastic-bound folder down beside my slice of pie. The cover page said, Calloway Family Asset Stewardship Plan. My mother had made a presentation out of my grandmother's life. Inside, in tab sections, a family LLC to hold the house, the acreage, the glass house, and the accounts. Managing members, Dale and Charlotte Calloway. A monthly distribution to me, she had used the word stipend, in print, aimed at a 30-year-old woman who runs a room of 26 children by herself all day long. And on page 7, a signature line, with one of those little plastic arrow tabs stuck beside it, pointing at exactly where I was supposed to sign my grandmother's life over to the 2 people she had spent a decade specifically walling out of it. My daddy studied his pie, the shape behind the curtain again. Just better lit. My mother talked the whole time in her adjuster's voice. Reasonable, warm, fiduciary responsibility, protecting the asset. You're so busy with those children, honey. I let her finish. Then I closed the folder, set it beside my plate, and said, Thank you for supper. The roast was perfect. I'm not signing this. The temperature in that dining room dropped 15 degrees in 1 second. My mother looked at me a long moment, and the softness went out of her face like somebody had thrown a breaker down in the basement. What was left was the woman from the courthouse parking lot in 2011. We tried it the nice way, she said. I picked up my purse and let myself out past that dark front window. And I want you to hear this next part carefully, because this is where it stopped being a family argument and turned into a war. 3 weeks later, a man in a golf shirt walked into the front office at Ledbetter Elementary, asked the secretary to point me out, and handed me a manila envelope in the hallway in front of 2 colleagues and a line of second graders. You've been served. Have a good one. I read it in my car. In the District Court of Tanner County, Commonwealth of Kentucky. Dale Calloway and Charlotte Calloway petitioners contesting the trust of Opal Marie Calloway. And the grounds put ice in my hands on that steering wheel. Undue influence. Lack of testamentary capacity. 14 pages of lawyer language rearranging my entire life into a crime. Every Saturday morning turned into access. Every drive to a doctor's appointment turned into control. The granddaughter recast as a manipulator who had isolated a dying woman, alienated her from her loving son, and steered $2.8 million into her own pocket. They wanted the trust thrown out. They wanted the estate distributed as if there had never been any plan at all, which, in Kentucky, hands a son his mother's fortune. And buried down in the motions was the tell, the one sentence with my mother's fingerprints all over it. Petitioners further request that the court appoint them interim managers of the estate during the pendency of these proceedings. Manage it for you. She had found a way to say it on legal stationery. Everything froze. The accounts, the house, the lease income, all of it locked up while a court decided whether my grandmother had been of sound mind. A question Opal Calloway would have found hilarious and then filed away for revenge. Evelyn called me that evening, and her voice was level in a way I learned to lean on. "They have every legal right to file this," she said. "That's the ugly beauty of the law, Junie. Any fool can knock on the courthouse door. And then, now come to my office. Your grandmother left instructions about this exact knock." Before I could get to Evelyn's office, the phone tree got to work. You have to understand how a rumor moves through a county of 11,000 people. It doesn't march, it seeps. An aunt in Glasgow heard I'd gotten myself put into the will. A great-uncle heard I'd been handling her pills at the end. By that Friday, a woman I have known since vacation Bible school looked at me 1 second too long in the produce aisle, and I understood that my mother's version of me had beaten me to the store. Then Tessa texted, my cousin, the one whose graduation dress my grandmother hemmed for free. "Hey, I just think you should do the right thing and split it. They're your parents. Aunt Charlotte says you'll be hearing from lawyers anyway." Aunt Charlotte says, I typed a reply and deleted it twice. And when I picked the phone back up an hour later, I'd been blocked. That one cost me something real. That Sunday I was sitting in the dark in the room over the laundromat with my phone face down when somebody knocked. Bernice Tuttle, 73 years old, holding a Dutch oven with both hands like a weapon, eyes dry and absolutely furious. "You're not answering your phone," she said, pushing straight past me to the stove, "so I'll say it here. Opal told us this was coming. All of it, honey. Every move they're making, she called it." "Us," she said. "Opal told us?" I wanted the rest of it right then. But Bernice just patted my hand and said Evelyn does the explaining in this outfit. She does the soup. 2 things happened that week. First, Evelyn, as trustee, asked me to move into the house on Weatherby Road. An occupied house is an insured house. An empty one is a liability, and this fight could run a year. My parents' attorney objected inside of 2 days, calling it the influencer occupying the disputed asset. So I packed 3 grocery sacks, out of some instinct I'm not going to examine, and I moved back out Route 9 to the house with the lamp in the window. And second, that first night I went looking for the switch. I wanted to be the one to turn it on, the way she turned it on for me. I followed the cord from that little table down behind the curtain to the outlet, and there was a plug-in timer, beige plastic. Older than I am, the dial notched at dusk. She had not been walking over and flipping that lamp on by hand for 12 years. She had bought a machine to keep her promise for her, in October of 2011. And that machine had kept it, every single evening, through ice storms and Christmases and the year the barn roof went and the last 4 months of her own dying. And it was keeping it still. Click, dusk, light on. Whether the woman who made the promise was alive or not, I sat down on that front room floor and finally came apart, quietly on my own time. Evelyn spread the file across her conference table the next morning like a surgeon laying out instruments. "Your grandmother," she said, "did not guess." She remembered. And then she walked me through the fortress that Opal Calloway spent 12 years building. The trust was created in February of 2012, 4 months after my parents set my clothes on the steps. She had sat in that same chair at 65 years old, in her Sunday coat, and told Evelyn she had just watched what her son would do for money, and she intended to make it useless to him. And every couple of years, she came back and tightened another bolt. The last amendment was signed in October of 2021, 13 months before any diagnosis, back when that woman was still hauling her own mulch. Attached to it 2 letters, 2 different physicians, Dr. Boyd and an internist over in Bowling Green she had booked entirely on her own. Each of them examined her the same week she signed. Each certified her memory, her orientation, her judgment, and in Dr. Boyd's dry phrasing, a degree of financial acumen exceeding my own. Evelyn had met with her alone every single time. No family in the building. Every meeting log. Do you see it? Capacity, documented, twice. Independently, dated, influence, impossible. I hadn't even known the trust existed. "There's more," Evelyn said, closing the folder. And for the first time, something like anticipation crossed that woman's face. "There is a page I am not permitted to show you before a hearing. Opal's instruction." I said, "Her instruction says you can't show me." "Her instruction," Evelyn said, "says the judge reads it first, out loud." She was very particular about the out loud. In August, they deposed me. If you've never been deposed, it's a conference room, a court reporter, a camera, and an attorney paid by the hour to take you apart politely. My parents' lawyer was a man named Curtis Lamb, 50s, silver glasses, the bedside manner of a paper cut. For 2 hours he asked reasonable questions in a reasonable voice. My schedule, my key to her house, whether I'd ever driven her to the bank, whether I'd ever cooked her supper, whether I was ever alone with her. All the ordinary mechanics of loving somebody old played back slowly so they'd look like grooming. And then, without one change in his tone, like he was asking about the weather, Mr. Lamb slid the knife in. "Ms. Calloway, have you ever been convicted of a crime involving dishonesty?" The court reporter's hands kept moving. The camera kept its little red eye on me. 12 years. 12 years I had kept that June locked in a drawer that nobody on this earth knew existed, and this man had a copy of the key in a folder in front of him, which meant my parents had gone digging through the worst summer of my life and handed it to him like ammunition, which is precisely what it was. The how of it turned out to be pathetically simple. It's a public court record in the county where they live, and my mother's brother-in-law has been a bail bondsman in that courthouse for 30 years. They had known since 2013. They had known for a decade and said nothing, and saved it. I heard my attorney object. I heard myself answer anyway, in the only voice I own, the one I use for a crying 6-year-old, low and level and unhurried. "Yes, sir. In 2013, I was 20 years old and living in my car. I took bread, peanut butter, and a package of socks from a grocery store. I was caught, I pled guilty, I paid my fine, and I picked up trash on Highway 31 for 16 hours. Mr. Lamb made a small note, please. "Debts are still debts," he said. "Wouldn't you agree?" He was quoting my mother without knowing he was doing it, or maybe knowing exactly. I didn't answer that one. When it was over, he squared his papers like a man clearing a supper table and said, "We'll see you at the hearing, Miss Calloway, unless your family would rather settle this like a family." In the parking garage, my hands finally started shaking. 2 weeks later, my principal called me in before first bell and could not look at me. An anonymous complaint had been filed with the Education Professional Standards Board. Financial exploitation of an elderly person by a certified educator. Anonymous, but it cited the probate case number, so we can go ahead and retire the mystery of who wrote it. And here's what people don't understand about licensed work. It does not matter how ridiculous the complaint is. The board has to investigate. It takes months. And while it grinds, a school district cannot keep a teacher in a building under an exploitation investigation. Nobody was cruel about it. That almost made it worse. My principal's voice came apart when she asked for my badge and my keys, and I set them on her desk. 6 years of Christmas programs in a little rectangle of laminate, and I walked out past a hallway wall the fourth graders had painted with 100 handprints on it. And I understood what they had figured out. The trust was a fortress, so they had stopped shooting at the fortress. They were shooting at me. That certificate was the one thing in my life I had built entirely alone, no inheritance, no help. 6 years of school and a state exam and $31,000 of debt. And my parents had figured out it was the one thing of mine the court could not protect. By then, my savings were nearly gone too. The trust can pay Evelyn to defend the trust. That's the law. The trust could not pay for my personal attorney or my certificate defense. $14,000 of my $17,000 had already walked out the door. That night I sat in the driveway on Weatherby Road and watched that red lamp click on at dusk, right on schedule, a dead woman keeping her promise while I tried to figure out how to keep mine. And then an email came in from Curtis Lamb's office. His clients, it said, remain open to a family resolution. The people who set the fire were selling me a fire extinguisher. Stay with me, because the next thing that happened is the hearing this whole story is named for, and it lasted about 90 seconds. The preliminary hearing was the third week of October, in the Little Oak courtroom on the second floor of the Tanner County Courthouse. Judge Naomi Cottrell presiding, about 60, and the patience of a woman who has heard every possible version of every possible family. My parents sat at the petitioner's table in their church clothes. My mother was serene. She whispered something to Lamb and smiled, and she scanned that room like it already belonged to her. And honest to God, I believe that in her mind this was the finish line, the day a court would finally hand a responsible adult the keys. Judge Cottrell put on her glasses and paged through the trust in the quiet. Then she stopped turning pages. "Counsel," she said to Lamb, "before we schedule anything further, has your client read Article 11 of this instrument?" And she read it out loud into the record in a courtroom voice that carried to the back row. Article 11. Should any beneficiary of this trust contest its validity, or petition any court for control or management of its assets, the beneficiary shall forfeit any and all interest granted herein. $10,000 apiece. Conditional, contest the trust, and the gift evaporates. My mother's smile held. 10,000 meant nothing against 2.8 million. But the judge wasn't finished. "There is an attached statement of intent," she said, "executed and notarized in October of 2021. The settler requests that it be read aloud in open court in the event of any challenge." And she turned the page. From Opal Marie Calloway. In 2011, my son Dale and his wife Charlotte petitioned a court to declare me incompetent so that they could manage my affairs. The court said no. I have spent every year since making certain the answer stays no. If they are standing in your courtroom now, then they have come after my death smiling, offering to manage what I left behind. I ask you to read this page out loud to them so that they understand I am, one final time, ahead of them. The silence in that room was total, and I watched it happen, the thing I will see for the rest of my life. My mother's smile didn't break. It drained from the eyes down, like something unplugged at the wall. My grandmother had predicted their exact move, in writing, 16 months before they made it, and every stranger in that room had just heard her do it. Lamb stood up anyway and asked for a full evidentiary hearing on undue influence, because if the trust itself fell, Article 11 fell right along with it. Judge Cottrell granted it, set it 7 weeks out. And I will swear on my grandmother's kitchen table that she looked at my parents about a half-second longer than she needed to. Out in the hallway afterward, my mother crossed to me, clothes, same perfume. And she said, quiet enough that only I could hear it, "You think a dead woman can protect you?" 3 nights later, my daddy came out to the house alone. I found him standing at the bottom of the steps, inside the light from that window, not knocking. A 61-year-old man holding his car keys like a hat in his hands. I stayed in the doorway. "Your mother wasn't always like this," he said. And then he told me a story I had never heard in 30 years of being their daughter. My mother's father died in 1994. She was 24. There was no estate. There was a coffee can, a stack of collection notices, a truck the bank took back, and a farm auctioned off on the courthouse steps in front of everybody she had ever known. She worked 2 jobs for 2 years to bury him and pay off a dead man's debts. And she came out of that with one conviction welded into her, that money left loose is a knife left on the floor, and the person who picks it up first and controls it is the one who loves this family the most. "She thinks she's protecting you," my daddy said, "from ending up like her. She can't hear how it sounds." And for about 5 seconds, standing in my grandmother's doorway, I saw the whole sad machine of it. A frightened 24-year-old building, a ledger so the floor could never fall out from under her again. I felt the pull of that old ache. And I want you to know that pity is real, even when it doesn't change one single thing. Because here's what I asked him. "And you, Daddy? What's your story?" He looked at his keys, the shape behind the curtain, the silence behind the newspaper. 40 years of whatever you think's best, Charlotte. "Just give her something, Junie," he said finally. "She'll stop. We can be done with it. Not, I'm sorry. Not she's wrong. Payment plan." I said good night and closed the door gently. And 3 days after that, my mother offered me the one thing money cannot buy. And I nearly took it. It came in her handwriting. 4 pages. And it was, word for word, the letter I had been writing for her in my own head for 12 years. "Junie Ray, my only child. Not one day has gone by. We can withdraw all of it, the case, the complaint, all of it, tomorrow. Come home. Sunday dinners, Christmas. Your room is still your room. We will be a family again, the way your grandmother would have wanted. All we ask is that the estate be divided fairly and managed properly by all of us together. I sat under that lamp with those 4 pages until 2 o'clock in the morning. I am not going to perform strength for you here. I read it 9 or 10 times. Because that was the actual prize, wasn't it? Not the money. The door open again. The notebook burned. My mother and Daddy at a table with me and nobody keeping score. I testified against them at 17, and I had been billed for it every day since, and here was the invoice, stamp paid in full. All it cost was everything my grandmother spent 12 years building, handed straight over to the people she built it against, plus one signature agreeing that their love had been a reasonable price all along. Toward daylight, I finally saw it. That letter was the deposition again, in nicer handwriting. My mother wrote those 4 pages, but the phrase "managed properly" did the answering. She came the next morning for my answer, and I met her on the steps under a lamp that was off in the daylight, and I kept my voice as low as hers had ever been. You can't buy back what you threw away, Mama, and I'm done paying interest on being your daughter. Something in her face closed up like a bank at 5 o'clock. She walked to her car, and from the open door she gave me one last look. "Then you'll lose the certificate, too," she said. And that was the last conversation my mother and I ever had as mother and daughter. The formal offer arrived the next week on Curtis Lamb's letterhead, and it was elegant the way a trap is elegant. $600,000 styled as a family settlement in exchange for full withdrawal of the contest. And 1 paragraph down, the sentence that had been aimed at me from the very beginning. It has been our client's experience that certification matters tend to resolve themselves when families reconcile. Translation: pay us and the board complaint goes away. Fight us and it doesn't. And if I fought, Lamb noted, almost apologetically, my 2013 conviction would be entered and examined in open court, in a county whose newspaper prints the court docket right between the ball scores and the church notices. Understand the arithmetic I was staring at. 600,000 was about 21%. Evelyn believed we would win, but believed is a lawyer's word. Meanwhile, the board investigation would grind on for a year with my certificate in a drawer. My savings were down to $2,900, and the price of winning was standing up in front of my hometown, while a man in silver glasses said the word theft out loud. My own attorney, the one I was paying with money I did not have, told me plainly that taking the deal was the rational move. You keep 80% in your privacy. I've watched people pay a lot more for a lot less. Even the arithmetic of surrender was reasonable. That is exactly what a good trap looks like. Evelyn was quiet a long time when I asked her. "The trust can survive a trial," she said finally. "That was built. The question, Junie, is whether you want to. And nobody on God's earth gets to grade you on that answer." They sent the draft agreement with a signature line and a little plastic arrow tab pointing at where I was supposed to end it. I sat at my grandmother's kitchen table that night, and I picked up the pen. I had that agreement flat on the table and the pen uncapped, and I want to be honest with you. I had decided to sign it. 21% to make it stop. People pay more for less. My hand was actually moving when somebody knocked. Bernice, with Loretta behind her, carrying a pie like a second opinion. They didn't ask what the papers were. Gray-headed women don't have to ask. They sat down at that table where they'd sat all winter, and Bernice put her hand flat on the pages, not grabbing, just resting, the way you rest a hand on a casket. "Let me tell you what I watched for 12 years, she said. "Every evening, dusk, that lamp came on in that window. Rain, snow, the night she got her diagnosis, the night she died. I used to check for it out my kitchen window like it was a lighthouse. One time I asked her why she didn't just leave the thing burning all day and be done with it, and Opal said, 'Because then it wouldn't mean anything, Bernie. It has to be a choice. It has to cost a little, every single day, or it isn't a promise, it's just a bulb.'" Loretta cut the pie without asking anybody. "She wasn't leaving you money, honey," Bernice said. "The money was the smallest thing in this house. She was leaving you witnesses." I looked down at the signature line, and that little plastic arrow, and Bernice asked me the question I have thought about every day since. "You have been paying for their love your whole life, Junie. Whatever this paper costs you, add it to the pile. What's the interest rate on that?" I sat with it. Then I picked up that agreement, squared the pages the way Curtis Lamb squares his, and tore them in half. Best sound I'd heard since my grandmother laughed. and nobody at that table knew yet what I was going to do instead, including me, until I heard myself say it out loud. To beat their story, I have to tell mine. All of it, under oath. Here's what I understood at that table, and if you take one thing away from me tonight, take this. Their entire artillery, the deposition, the board complaint, the settlement letter, ran on one single fuel. My silence. That summer in the Corolla was only a weapon, while I was still treating it like a wound. A secret can be held over you. A story can't. So the next morning I sat in Evelyn's office and gave my instructions, and for once in my life I did not soften them. No settlement, no counteroffer, no delay. And then the part that made my own attorney blink, I would put my own record into evidence. Myself. Voluntarily. Certified copy, the citation, the fine, the community service hours, and a sworn statement of every circumstance around it, filed before Curtis Lamb could enter a single page of it on his terms. You cannot threaten to expose what a woman has already laid on the table in her own handwriting. The blackmail died right there. Then we built the witness list, and it was not lawyers. It was Dr. Boyd and 18 years of charts. It was Wendell Pike, the hospice nurse of record. And it was that kitchen, Bernice, Loretta, and the whole gray-headed nation of Tanner County. The people who had watched a lamp burn in a window for 12 years and knew exactly who it burned for. Evelyn looked at that list a long moment. Your grandmother said you'd get here, she said. She just hoped it wouldn't cost this much. The evidentiary hearing opened the first week of December, and that courtroom was full, which in Tanner County means the church crowd, the diner crowd, and a reporter from the Tanner County Herald with a fresh legal pad. Lamb went first, and I'll give the man his due. He was good. For an entire day he built a woman out of my outline, a person with a key to a dying widow's house, access to her routines, her mail, her medicine, a granddaughter with, and here he let the pause do the work, a documented conviction for theft, who stood to receive $2.8 million under an altered estate plan. My mother testified in a Navy suit with a tissue balled in her fist, and she was devastating, poised, wounded, reasonable. We only ever wanted things managed properly. Junie has struggled for years. We were trying to protect her and his mother both. She grieved better on that stand than she had at the casket. Then my cousin Tessa, 27 years old, not looking at me, testifying that I kept to myself and got real close to Grandma at the end. 2 innocent facts arranged into fingerprints. That was the day I learned you can lose a person twice. The judge listened to every bit of it without a face. Bernie sat behind me the entire day, behind her Loretta, and behind Loretta 4 rows of gray heads that had no legal function whatsoever, except that Judge Cottrell could count. When they adjourned, Lamb packed his briefcase like a man ahead on points, and honestly, he was. Judge Cottrell looked over her glasses. Junie Calloway. The court will hear you at 9 in the morning. That night the lamp clicked on at dusk, and I sat under it and practiced nothing at all, because my grandmother always said the truth doesn't need rehearsing. It just needs somebody willing to go first. I took that stand at 9 o'clock in a gray dress, and I used the only voice I own. The one for frightened people in dark rooms. And I told it, all of it. All of it. October of 2011, 2 weeks past my 18th birthday. The key that wouldn't turn, 3 grocery sacks with the sweaters folded, because my mother folds everything, even in abandonment. My father's shape behind the hallway light, and my mother's voice through 4 inches of door. Love is an account, Junie. Every account gets settled, and yours is overdrawn. I watched a court reporter type my mother's sentence into the permanent record of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I told them about the 4 miles out Route 9 at 11 o'clock at night and a lamp coming on in a window. And then, because it was mine to tell now, and nobody else's, I told them about June of 2013, 20 years old, 20 months out of my parents' house, the back of the Baptist church parking lot, the field house shower, the bread, the peanut butter, and the 3-pack of white socks. Counsel has used the word dishonest, I said, and I looked at nobody but Judge Cottrell. I was hungry, and I was too proud to ask the one person who would have said yes. I got caught, and I paid what the court told me to pay, and I have not taken so much as a paperclip since. I put myself through college. I've taught 600 children in this county to read music. They call that a criminal history. Where I come from, we call it what it cost to get here. Then Evelyn stood and entered my own filing into the record, every page of it, released by me, voluntarily, 3 weeks before. And I watched the leverage they had mined out of the worst summer of my life turn into vapor in a silent courtroom. Last, the dates. Plain and flat. The trust was created in February of 2012, 4 months after the grocery sacks. Amended for the last time in October of 2021, 13 months before any diagnosis, 2 physicians certifying her mind the same week. My grandmother didn't change her plan because I got close to her money, I said. She changed it because she watched them come for hers. I stepped down. My mother was staring straight at me, and behind all that composure, something had very quietly begun to slide. Then came the afternoon I want read at my funeral. Dr. Boyd, 18 years of charts, 2 capacity letters, and the flat professional opinion that Opal Calloway possessed a degree of financial acumen exceeding my own. Wendell Pike, the hospice nurse of record, walking that court through every visit note and every medication log, confirming under oath that I had never once handled her chart, her pills, or her paperwork that in the file, I appeared under exactly one heading, family. And then the gray-headed nation took the stand, one at a time, and that courtroom stopped being Curtis Lamb. Loretta Sims, who has fed half this county breakfast, telling Judge Cottrell that Opal Calloway planned that trust, the way she planned everything, mum sober as a hymn and twice as loud. And Bernice Tuttle, 73 years old, hands folded, 31 years next door. She testified about a red glass lamp, a timer plugged in behind a curtain in October of 2011, a bulb she watched from her kitchen window every evening for 12 years. Ice storms, holidays, the night Opal died still burning. That light was for the girl, she said. Everybody on Weatherby Road knew what it meant. It meant that child had a home whether her mama and daddy wanted her to or not. Lamb tried to cross her. He suggested that elderly neighbors sometimes misremember things. And Bernice looked at him over her glasses, the way you'd look at gum on a church pew. Old women notice things, young man. It's about all we do. The gallery laughed. Judge Cottrell let them. And that is when my mother broke. Not a scream, a correction. She stood up at the petitioner's table, right over Curtis Lamb's hand on her arm, because a courtroom full of people was smiling at a version of this family where she was the villain, and Charlotte Calloway has never once in her life lost control of a story. We fed her for 18 years, she said, too loud for that room. You don't get to walk away from a debt like that. Love is an account, and it gets settled. And there it was. 50 strangers, a court reporter, a judge, and a newspaper reporter all heard my mother state the household religion out loud, in her own voice, the exact sentence from the porch. And nobody had pulled it out of her. She offered it. Judge Cottrell called a 30-minute recess. When she came back, she had the trust in one hand and a ruling in the other. She read from the bench, and she did not hurry. The petition to invalidate the trust of Opal Marie Calloway denied, with prejudice. On capacity, the court found 2 independent, contemporaneous medical certifications and the sworn testimony of a treating physician of 18 years, against 0 medical evidence from the petitioner. On undue influence, the court found, and I'm quoting the words that mattered to me, no evidence whatsoever that the beneficiary influenced this estate plan, and abundant evidence that the plan was a response of many years' standing to the petitioner's own prior conduct. The trust stood. Every bolt my grandmother tightened held. And then Article 11. The court found the contest had been brought without probable cause, which under that clause meant the conditional gifts were forfeit. My parents had sued for $2.8 million, and the arithmetic of their ambition came due at 0, minus the $20,000 my grandmother had left out as bait, minus their own attorney's fees. And the court noted for the record that it would entertain the trustee's motion to recover fees from the petitioner. My mother took the sound of all that the way a person takes a diagnosis. My daddy took it looking at his key. Out in the hallway by the tall windows, she crossed to me one last time. Up close, her composure had fine cracks running through it now, like a windshield after a cold night. And she said, and I believe to this day it was the truest thing she ever said to me, "After everything we gave you." Not sorry, not even angry really, just the ledger open to my page, one final time. and I heard my own voice come out the way it does when a long night is finally over. Then consider us settled. I walked past her, out those doors, into the December cold, and I did not look back. This is where I'm supposed to tell you it felt like winning. It felt like a discharge, like somebody I'd been treating my whole life had finally been released. And I want to be straight with you about the price, because every win has one, and the stories that skip that part are lying to you. The Herald ran it on page 3. My name, the trust, and one paragraph. Sourced from the public record I opened myself, about a 20-year-old girl, a loaf of bread, and a package of socks. For about 2 weeks, people at the Save-A-Lot looked at me 1 second too long, and I let them. That was the cost of taking the weapon away, and I would pay it again tomorrow. But I did pay it. Privacy, once you spend it, does not refund. And there was the other thing. That night, I sat under the lamp and found the contact in my phone that still said Mama and Daddy, a habit 12 years dead. I didn't block it. Blocking is for doors somebody might knock on. I just deleted it, and the screen asked me if I was sure, and for the first time in my adult life, the answer was clean. The girl who kept a door cracked open for them was gone. I left her on the witness stand, under oath, where she finally got to matter. 7 weeks after the ruling, the state board closed the complaint, unsubstantiated. My principal handed my badge back across her desk with wet eyes and a speech she couldn't finish. My first morning back, a room of first graders sang, "You are my sunshine," at me so loud and so badly that I had to step into the hallway for a minute, on my own time. The house came fully mine when the appeal window closed, and I did with it what my grandmother would have done, which is to say nothing dramatic and everything deliberate. The kitchen table on Weatherby Road runs full again on Saturday mornings. Bernice and Loretta and the whole gray-headed nation, biscuits out of the same pan. Coffee still criminally weak because some recipes are load-bearing. The lease income from the glass house, $4,100 a month, goes into something Evelyn helped me set up called the Opal Fund. It pays a deposit and 1 month's rent for kids in this county between 18 and 21 who get put out of their homes, a tank of gas, work boots, a phone bill, no application longer than 1 page, no repayment ever, house rule. And in April, an envelope came from town, my daddy's handwriting, alone. Inside was a check for $6,300, which meant nothing at all until I did the arithmetic. $175 a month. 36 months, 15 years old to 18. He had refunded the room and board, to the dollar, with 1 line on a sticky note. I should have opened the door. I didn't tear it up, and I didn't call. I signed it over to the fund, where it covered deposits for 4 kids with their clothes in garbage bags, which is the only interest that debt was ever going to pay. And in June, Bernice showed up on my steps with a girl named Marisol, 18 years old, 1 semester into nursing school, put out of her house over a boyfriend and a scholarship her mother didn't approve of. I heard myself say the rent was $1 a year. And no, she could not owe me. House rule. Then I drove into town and had a key cut, and handing that key over felt like the entire estate changing hands a second time. Correctly. Tonight it's October again. 14 years, near enough, since 3 grocery sacks sat on a set of concrete steps. Through the kitchen doorway I can see Marisol at my grandmother's table with her anatomy cards spread out, wearing my old sweatshirt, eating biscuits she did not pay for. And at dusk, that little beige timer behind the curtain gives its click, the same click it has given every evening since October of 2011, and the lamp comes on in the front window over Weatherby Road. Here is everything I know, and it fits in 1 sentence. Love doesn't keep receipts, it leaves a lamp on, and a lamp, it turns out, can outlive the hand that lit it. So if somebody in your life ever turned love into a ledger, if you've been handed an invoice for your own childhood, hear me, and hear me clearly. You do not owe them your life, and you are allowed to stop paying interest on it. And if this found you on a hard night tonight, sitting in the dark somewhere, go on and check the window. Somebody somewhere has left a light on for you, and it is still burning, whether they're here to flip the switch or not.